This photograph shows the complex industrial environment of a factory floor, filled with heavy spinning machinery. To manage the physical risks of such an environment for young workers, Chapter 7 of the Factories Act 1948, spanning Sections 67 through 77, establishes a rigid statutory architecture. Section 67 defines the foundational legal baseline for entry by explicitly addressing the employment of young children. The statutory metric is precise. No child who has not completed their 14th year is permitted or required to work in any factory. This prohibition is comprehensive. The law provides no waivers, exemptions, or allowances for parental consent for anyone below this specific age threshold. Once a person crosses that 14-year mark, their employment becomes legally permissible, but it immediately falls under a strict matrix of medical certification, operational constraints, and administrative oversight. The statute ignores subjective measures of maturity. Instead, it relies entirely on a measurable, chronological boundary as the absolute foundation for all subsequent industrial compliance. Section 68 details the immediate legal hurdles an adolescent, or a child who has completed their 14th year, must clear before entering the factory floor. First, a formal certificate of fitness must be secured and kept in the physical custody of the factory manager. Second, the young worker must carry a physical token referencing that exact certificate on their person while they are actively at work. These two conditions must be met simultaneously. If the manager lacks the certificate or the worker forgets the token, the employment becomes illegal. By requiring both documents, Section 68 shifts legal enforcement from a static paperwork exercise in the administrative office to a real-time physical verification system directly on the active factory floor. To obtain that required documentation, Section 69 outlines the application process. A young person, guardian, or factory manager can formally apply for a certificate of fitness. The authority to grant the certificate rests entirely with a state-appointed certifying surgeon, who must ascertain the applicant's physical standards and workplace fitness. This diagram shows two pathways: granting a certificate as a child if the applicant has completed their 14th year, or as an adult if they have completed their 15th year and are fit for a full day's work. The surgeon operates under clear legal constraints. If they lack personal knowledge of the factory or the specific manufacturing process, they are forbidden from granting the certificate until they physically examine the proposed workplace. These certificates are administratively rigid. They are valid for exactly 12 months, they can be issued subject to conditions regarding the nature of the work, and the surgeon holds the unilateral power to revoke them if the worker becomes unfit. The factory occupier must pay all certification fees. Returning to our diagram, an adolescent holding this adult certificate is legally deemed an adult. However, male adolescents under 17 and all female adolescents are strictly limited to working between 6 a.m. and 7 p.m. If an adolescent fails to obtain this adult certificate, the law defaults to treating them as a child for all purposes of the Act, regardless of their chronological age. The Act removes adulthood from the calendar and delegates it to medical science, utilizing the certifying surgeon as the ultimate gatekeeper for labor capacity. For those classified as children, Section 71 defines the mandatory operational boundaries governing their employment. A child cannot work for more than 4.5 hours in any single day. Furthermore, work during the night is strictly prohibited, defined as a 12-hour consecutive period that must include the interval between 10 p.m. and 6 a.m. The child's daily schedule is further constrained. They are limited to working in a maximum of 2 shifts, and the law dictates that these shifts cannot overlap. This chart shows the spread limitation. A child's total shift duration cannot spread over more than 5 hours. Additionally, they are assigned to one specific relay, which management cannot change more than once in 30 days without written permission. Section 52, which guarantees weekly holidays, applies to child workers with 0 allowable exemptions. The law also strictly bans a child from working in multiple factories on the same day. For female children, the working window narrows even further. They are restricted exclusively to working between the hours of 8 a.m. and 7 p.m. These strict hourly and spread limitations prevent exhaustion by forcing industrial schedules to mold entirely around the physiological limits of the child worker. Looking at this photograph of the Calcutta Dock Labor Board, the scale and administrative complexity of tracking individual workers is highly apparent. Sections 72 through 74 apply precise rules to manage this complexity for children. Section 72 requires the prefix display of a formal notice of periods of work for children, clearly showing the exact hours they are required to work each day. Section 73 pairs this with the requirement that the manager maintain a highly specific register of child workers, which must be available to the inspector at all times during working hours. This register must record statutory fields for every child: their name, the exact nature of their work, their group, their shift relay, and the number of their granted certificate of fitness. The legal barrier here is final. If a child's particulars are missing from this register, allowing them to work is illegal. Section 74 then introduces the rule of strict correspondence to bind these records together. A child's actual physical working hours must perfectly correspond to both the displayed notice of periods and the pre-entered data against their name in the register. By eliminating scheduling ambiguity, these sections turn paperwork into an unbending legal contract, dictating the exact location and timeframe of the child's presence. Chapter 7 backs up these strict regulations with Section 75, which outlines the statutory authority of the inspector to enforce compliance. An inspector can intervene in two specific scenarios: if they believe a person working without a certificate is actually a young person, or if a young person working with a certificate appears to no longer be medically fit. In either scenario, the inspector holds statutory power to serve a notice to the factory manager, requiring a mandatory medical re-examination by a certifying surgeon. The operational consequences are immediate. The inspector can legally suspend the young person's employment entirely until they are certified fit or proven by the surgeon not to be a young person. Section 76 grants the state government powers to operationalize this chapter, allowing them to prescribe certificate forms, set physical standards, and regulate certifying surgeons' procedures. Finally, Section 77 clarifies that the provisions of this chapter act in addition to, and not in derogation of, the existing Employment of Children Act of 1938. Chapter 7 constructs a closed-loop system. Medical science sets the entry boundaries. Rigid paperwork dictates the daily reality, and inspectors possess the power to halt employment, ensuring young persons are integrated into industrial labor strictly under auditable, controlled conditions.